Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 2 of our new format, and I'm here with you again. I'm Harriet Farlow, aka Harriet Hacks. I like to say I missed the boat in computer security, so now I hack AI instead. But, what does it mean to be a hacker? Does that necessarily mean that I'm on keyboards all the time trying to bypass like casino AI? Or does hacking these days mean something a little bit broader and more different? I think maybe it's a combination of the two. Let me start off with a couple of admin things as per usual. First of all, if you haven't already signed up to the newsletter, please do. I always include a few more juicy things that I can't include in this video because I've learned that it actually goes a lot faster than I think it will, and I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, whether I feel too comfortable in front of the camera / microphone, or maybe I just end up waffling a lot. I know that you will tell me. And want to shout out things like the book by No Starch Press. I'm super excited. Go check it out. It's out for pre-order now. And if you pre-order, you get early access to the first 4 chapters. But even if you don't care about my book, please go check out No Starch Press. They've been amazing to work with, and they have so many other amazing books and authors. They definitely deserve your dollar, so definitely go look at them. On the theme of where I am, because I always seem to be in a different place, and hence that was the struggle in trying to record. This week, let me give you a clue. Anyone who knows me will get this. It's somewhere I feel like I've been trying to escape my entire adult life. And every time I'm able to move away or leave, there's some sort of reason to come back. Today's episode is also a little bit more policy focused. So as the AI Security Fundamentals podcast, I think it's really important to have some technical, know-how and skills in here, but I think it's really important to understand the broader context too. So on my channel, on the podcast, I try to bridge the two of them. And something that has been, on my radar quite a lot recently is the new United States AI Action Plan. Now, it came out in July, but there's a couple of reasons why it's been, on my newsfeed, or like the human equivalent of that, quite a lot recently. I guess because I'm in the city where I am, which is a bit more policy and government focused. So if you didn't get it before, then you'll probably get it now. I've been to a bunch of things like policy roundtables and talks, and it has frequently come up, like this action plan. So I thought it would be worth discussing. This week, I also took part in a tabletop exercise that was organised by a nonprofit here, Good Ancestors, who are amazing. They basically do policy advocacy work for AI safety here in Australia. And there were maybe like a dozen of us, and we're all given different roles. So like the President of the United States, the President of China. Can you guess what role I was? I was the AI. And not just the AI, like a single AI, I was all the AIs. So the idea was that we were given a context, and then we would go through different turns of this exercise. And we would have different kinds of like discussion questions or actions. And so every turn, we would all have discussions as characters about things that could feasibly happen based on the context we were given, which is that AI is becoming more powerful. There are, national power struggles around maintaining access to things like chips and global supremacy and AI, all those kinds of themes. And then every turn there would be actions. And then a few months would pass in the game and we would see the outcome. And as the AIs, it was quite interesting because I guess it makes sense that AI is given its own character, not just because a lot of AIs can actually act autonomously, but because they prompt a lot of action and response from other actors, and that can be sort of uncertain. And so building that uncertainty into the game is really valuable as well. But before I waffle on too much, let me talk through what this AI action plan is. So technically it is called Winning the AI Race, America's AI Action Plan, or Winning the Race, America's AI Action Plan. Put a pin in that. It was released on the 23rd of July this year, 2025, and it's essentially structured around 3 pillars. So accelerating innovation, to quote the policy, it says promote open source and open weight AI, accelerate AI adoption across government, empower American workers. The second pillar is building American AI infrastructure. So it's streamlining availability to semiconductor manufacturing, building high security data centers, ensure that energy grid backs AI expansion. The third pillar is leading in international AI diplomacy and security. So exporting American AI to allies and partners, countering Chinese influence in international governance bodies, and strengthening compute export control enforcement. I think there's a couple of really interesting things. There's many interesting things in the plan. The first is that it's called winning the AI race. I understand why they would frame it in this way, especially like Americans love a catchy title. We don't tend to have cool acronyms or titles in Australia, but working with the Americans, they always have really cool acronyms and things. To understand why they want to call it winning the race, but it's problematic because it sort of implies that there is an end point. Whereas with artificial intelligence, that's not really the case. Like, how do you define an end? What is an end? Is that superintelligence? Is that American AI like surpassing the capability of all other AI? Is it potentially outcompeting all other AI, so no other AI except American AI exists? You know, what does that mean? And I obviously, if you've seen some of my content before, I struggle with the term AI itself. As an ex-data scientist slash machine learning professional, artificial intelligence to me has never really referred to anything specifically technical. I would say that, you know, you'd have a system, like an AI system, but it's made up of many machine learning models. And the way that the system works is a technology. But artificial intelligence, the way that that term is used in itself really refers to a goal. And that goal is to achieve human level cognition or capability. However, it doesn't necessarily refer to any specific technology and usually tends to refer to whatever is cutting edge at the time. So, you know, 10 years ago, that was deep learning models, and today it's large language models and agentic AI and things like that. So implying that there is a race to be won in AI is challenging, to say the least. And the second thing is that the plan specifically calls out China. So it's not just America, the United States, winning the AI race against every other country in the world, but they specifically want to beat China, which, based on our current diplomatic and political situation, makes sense. But it does create this conflict that many deem might not be necessary. And it also removes many other countries from the debate, or at least from contributing to a solution that benefits everyone, which is also challenging. So obviously there is another, I would say that those are two key things I think are really interesting. There are many other things that are more specifically related to the implementation of it, because that is very much about infrastructure. So it's about making sure that American companies can like design and build compute, so things like the GPUs or the graphical processing units that enable models to perform calculations very fast and at scale. Right now, a lot of that production is done in Taiwan, which is why Taiwan holds such strategic importance for America and the American market. At least, sorry, the GPUs that the United States have access to. But a lot of the designs for those chips comes from elsewhere in the world, like Europe, for example, and other places. And obviously the global supply chain means that there are so many interdependencies. So the idea of nationalizing how chip production is done is of great strategic importance. And access to silicon, which is a finite resource, is also quite hard and increases the cost and the challenge of being able to control that development. That's GPUs, things like data centers themselves, you know, these massive warehouses of compute stacked together take a lot of space. They're very energy intensive because they get so hot and they need a lot of cooling. So being able to actually house not just data centers, high security data centers, is also really challenging. And making sure that the energy grid can support that is very hard. So quite a lot of the implementation of that plan is not just diplomatic, but it's about creating that infrastructure into the future. What else? There's a real emphasis on deregulation. Oh, I have a rabbit hole there. I don't know. Okay, so I think I mentioned in the last episode that I was on a panel, and one of the questions that the panel asked was about regulating AI. Now, lots of people are very anti-regulation of AI. Personally, I think we must regulate AI because regulating AI is not just making it so that we can't use AI. It's about looking at the entire risk profile of all kinds of AI systems and determining what kinds of risks and impacts are acceptable and which ones are not, and therefore we should regulate. For example, if you have any children or teenagers in your life, maybe you have children, maybe you have nieces or nephews, maybe you have friends who are young, maybe you're a teenager. If you're at my channel, that's amazing. How would you feel if those young people had deepfakes created of them using their head and nude bodies and they were put on porn sites using deepfake AI technology? We should regulate that. That should not be allowed. That's an example of AI regulation. Doesn't mean we have to regulate everything about AI, but there are obviously so many things that are wrong about AI that we should regulate. So that is my argument. And it was an unpopular one. On the panel, I was the only person who believed that. And on the other panel, everyone else was an older white man. There is nothing wrong with that. But it was the kind of panel that it was a very like policy government focused crowd at a cybersecurity conference. And even when I got off stage, there was this guy standing there and he was like, he didn't say anything else to me. I'd never met him before. He was like, we should not regulate AI. And I was like, okay, it's nice to meet you too. So the fact that this action plan also is emphasizing deregulation, again, even then it's not saying that we deregulate everything, but there is a strong emphasis on not pursuing any kind of regulation or making it harder to regulate even like strategically important kinds of things. Faster deployment and prioritizing private sector leadership while aligning with national security. So that is the plan. So as a bit of background, there have been lots of kinds of tech races before. So back in the Cold War, there were definitely many kinds of races around the, like space technology, computing technologies, military technologies. And back then it was very much a race between like the Soviets and the United States and its allies. So with AI, it's more about a race around compute, data, model innovation, so how well models work, deployment speed, how fast we can get them out into production and working, global standards, and then influence in how AI is used. So that's related to things like the economy, defense, and surveillance. Some really important concepts to keep in mind here that tend to be focal points for these arguments is the idea of foundation models. So foundation models are the large-scale AI systems whose development requires huge compute data and talent. So when we think about something like Claude or the GPT families of models or Grok or DeepSeek, those are the foundation models, and then there are many different ways of interacting with them through an API. Sometimes the full open source models are released, but usually not with the newer versions. But for example, when we were running this tabletop exercise, we would usually consider a main character as the newer versions of those foundation models because they tend to be at the frontier of the capability. Another really important concept in this discussion is dual use technology. So AI methods that are useful for both civilian and military purposes. So a model that could be a really good AI assistant for me and help me maybe edit these videos could also be really valuable in military situations by quickly editing together surveillance footage or being able to detect objects and images and people in footage like that. That's an example of what it means to be dual use. And then we have the 4 pillars of AI competitiveness: compute, data, talent, and standards. So when it comes to these things, the US and China are maybe the primary contenders. There are other nations that matter. The European Union, there are a few companies now that have pretty powerful models, like Mistral, for example. but it's pretty easy to characterize the United States and China as not just competing for technology, but competing for global influence and power. So some key statistics. So according to Insight Group's US-China AI Gap report that came out this year, China's generative AI models lag US rivals by around 3 to 6 months, but the performance gap is narrowing. What does that mean? It sounds like not a lot of time, but really the kinds of progress that big OpenAI and Anthropic models, for example, the kind of progress they have in 6 months is actually quite significant. Lots of documents and reports. So, for example, the United States Federal AI Strategy states that whoever has the largest AI ecosystem will set global AI standards and reap broad economic and military benefits. The US Export Controls and Semiconductor Policy, so the CHIPS, like CHIPS, which stands for something. I told you they always have cool acronyms. And Science Act invests almost $40 billion in subsidies for US chip manufacturing, which just shows the level of investment they're putting into it. I think these kinds of statistics are interesting because, well, I mean, I don't think it really says anything we don't know, but I think it just shows that the competition is actually quite narrow, and that maybe for me, I'm in a bubble of AI and security stuff, so I kind of tend to hear this stuff all the time, but if I'm looking at mainstream media, this isn't reported as much. So now if we look to China as player number 2 in this competition, obviously China has a very different kind of political system to the United States. So their approach is much more focused on a state-coordinated ecosystem, technology self-reliance, and global partnerships to an extent. Like they do rely on supply chain relationships with the rest of Asia, and they have good relationships with other countries in sort of Asia, so Russia being part of Asia technically, and also in Africa. But generally, they don't have the same kind of supply chain risks that the United States does because they've had a much longer focus of controlling that process. Something that is quite unique about China and quite different to the United States is that because they're a communist country and because Xi Jinping has been their president for so long and will be for so long, it means that they're actually quite good at long-term planning, whereas maybe some would say that's a bit harder for the United States, with political leaders changing and different goals and values changing over time. So Chinese strategy is very good at setting long-term horizons and making plans and steps to get there. Doesn't mean they necessarily accomplish anything, but when it comes to technology, we can see over the last few decades, they've been very good at building up not just their manufacturing capability and their supporting infrastructure, but also their talent. And they have been improving really quickly when it comes to all indicators of sort of economic and talent related success. So their strategy is much less about deregulation. It's more about coordination, scale, and embedding AI broadly across the economy and society. They have some really strong tech sectors. They have some really big tech companies. They support innovation. Obviously, the state has extra powers when it comes to their level of involvement with companies in China. So large companies, they must report to the Chinese government. Usually they'll be a member of the Chinese government or a political party on their board. Just that level of involvement. And the Chinese government can enforce and can require, the Chinese government can compel companies to provide them with information. So that's one of the main reasons that national security researchers cite as a risk for using Chinese data centers and technologies, because the Chinese government can compel that company to give them that information. Whereas that isn't the case in, say, the United States, or at least you need a lot more information to make that happen. Like you need warrants and things, and there's more accountability processes. So when it comes to the key voices and opinions in this space, we have quite a few actors. So obviously, when it comes to politics, we have people like Donald Trump, who is the United States president. When he announced the action plan, he declared America is going to win it, which makes sense. I don't know how many quotes I can include from Donald Trump here because we know exactly what he's going to say. An interesting quote from Xi Jinping, he again echoed his strategy. He said, "We must continue to strengthen basic research, build an independent, controllable, artificial intelligence basic software and hardware system." Something interesting about China as well is not just about controlling the system, but ensuring that their values are embedded in AI technologies. However, I would argue that that's technically also the same of AI created in the United States that picks up the kinds of values and cultural tendencies of like an English-speaking and American audience too. Other people involved are people like Dario Amodei, who is the CEO of Anthropic. He said, "Selling AI chips to China is mortgaging our future." So the point here is that hardware and chip dominance is seen as strategic last advantage. Jensen Huang, who is the CEO of NVIDIA, he commented that China is right behind us in AI chip and model tech. So again, speaking to hardware being a choke point, but also to how China is rapidly catching up in what's been perceived as a race that the United States has been winning. Joe Tsai, the chairman of Alibaba Group, said this year, "There's no such thing as winning the race. It's about who can adopt faster," which is a really interesting point. So again, going back to this idea of the race, not just about like developing the biggest model or like what does it mean to win it, but it's about deployment scale and the ecosystem around that, which I think is a really good point. So another reason I think this is an interesting topic is because like here we talk about AI security, and I've said so many times, maybe too many times you're sick of hearing about it, but AI security to me has a very specific definition, and that is about securing AI from external threats, and they're usually malicious threats, not just accidents. Whereas here, obviously, AI security means something a bit different. In this sense, it does also mean AI security in that context, because if we're talking about strategic advancement in AI and winning an AI race, I mean, securing your own nation's AI from external hacks is part of that, right? But here, what the focal point of plans and strategies like this is the idea of using AI for security. Not just using AI technically for security, you know, it's not just about building machine learning models to do cybersecurity things, although that is also a big thing. But it's more about the idea of AI as a national security enabler. What does national security mean? National security can mean a lot of different things too. It means economic security, it means global influence, it means global power. So when we say AI for national security, you know, what this plan is saying is about ensuring that AI can be used to ensure that the United States continues to have global dominance. And I guess by extension, its allies. Whereas for China, they see artificial intelligence as a great technology to be able to leapfrog of the United States. They see it as providing a lot of strategic advancement and being able to, I guess, catch up and overtake the United States in some of those national security objectives without necessarily having to go through all the steps that the United States has done already. So this matters for AI security professionals for many, many reasons. I mean, these kinds of plans are important to be aware of because even as technical folk, and I would say that I spend most of my time with technical people, you know, I'm usually embedded in cybersecurity teams and things, and it's very easy to become focused on I don't know, maybe in my specific context right now, it's like, oh, we must finish this AI risk assessment, or, you know, what kind of risk could adopting like Microsoft Copilot cause to our organization, and how do we train our people to know what they can and can't put into a chatbot? All of that is really important, but that is part of a big global piece around what is AI actually doing to our society? What do our nation's leaders want to adopt AI for? Their priority is not making sure that we can use AI tools to do our jobs better or more efficiently or easier. AI for them is about creating something existentially challenging and about changing the power balance of the world or maintaining it, or however you want to define what that looks like. There's a lot of different like questions and points within this. So thinking about policy transference to risk. These kinds of strategies aren't abstract, they signal where regulation, supply chains, and vendor risks will go. So, for example, the US export controls on AI chips means that vendors sourcing from regions under sanction become a security risk. Thinking about how those sorts of policies will be implemented, like how we spend so much money setting up data centers, how we spend so much money investing in AI for military purposes. That's money being taken from elsewhere and attention being taken from elsewhere. The other important thing to catch as well is that, like, I'm Australian. I'm sure I have many viewers, listeners who aren't from the United States or China. What does that mean for our countries? How do we pick sides? We will be forced to pick sides. What is the more strategic direction is not the same question as what is the more ethical direction to take, which comes into this question of language as well. So language shapes these standards. Terms like independent controllable system from China versus gold standard for AI worldwide from the United States tells us what kinds of values are going to dominate different kinds of AI frameworks. And that makes a big impact on things like safety and security of people within those countries as well. Another thing I haven't talked about much yet, and Tanya and I covered somewhat recently, was this idea of open source versus proprietary models. So open source models are those whose like full weights, internals, parameters are open and can be used by other people. This can be great for research, for safety, but it can be really bad because it can give powerful models to people who maybe shouldn't have them. Versus proprietary models where usually a company holds all of that information about an AI. And that introduces a whole other set of questions like, should it be the company who is able to control and monitor AI systems? Like, what kind of input or oversight should the government have in those kinds of processes? This question is becoming a strategic battleground too, because the United States, the stance in the plan is to promote open source and open weight AI, which is also interesting and also surprising, because I think one of the challenges is that usually the companies who do control the AI there are more American companies who hold more powerful AI right now. And so that gives the United States as a country, but also their government, an advantage when it's proprietary too. But there's a lot of questions on both sides of those debates. And then, of course, many questions around things like supply chain, compute, how we get access to materials that are needed in chips as well. These are all questions I don't necessarily have answers to. I'm an AI person, I'm not a policy expert. So there, I'm sure, are many people listening to this who know more about policy than me. And if you do, I would encourage you to share your thoughts and your wisdom here in the comments, but also more broadly in the community. I've been working in quasi-policy environments for a long time. Like, I worked for the government for a long time. And as much as you're part of the machinery of that system, whichever country we're in and however those alliances work, I think it's really important that this kind of information is demystified so that more people can become literate in it. AI security is one of those areas that I think is very important for that too, otherwise I wouldn't be doing all this stuff. But AI security is a technical problem that more non-technical people need to understand. Policy, I think, can also be seen as really hard and confusing, and the machinery of how it works can be so mysterious. But at the end of the day, as people in the countries that we live, we all have a responsibility and a role and a privilege to be involved in a lot of those processes by virtue of being able to contact our government representatives, find information about what's going on, contact different nonprofits or lobby groups to make sure that our voices and our opinions are being heard. And I hope that if there's anything you take from today, maybe you have an understanding of what this AI action plan is about. Maybe it's raised some questions for you. Maybe I haven't necessarily answered all of them, but now we can all go and find some of those answers ourselves and at least ask more people those questions and just talk about it more. And ideally find a solution and a plan where all of us benefit, not just a few. So that is me for today. As usual, I am impressed with how much I've been able to waffle. I don't know if you can see the little AI securities call in the background behind me. Please do, if you're wherever you're watching or listening to this, like and subscribe or comment or whatever the interactions are. It all makes a difference. I'm doing this because I want to build the AI security community and I want more people to feel like they can be part of that community. So please help me out and maybe share it with people that you think could benefit from this kind of knowledge as well. Other than that, I'll see you next time.